Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June Data and Performance Management Committee meeting. Thank you for joining. If you haven't already, please enter your agency name into the chat box so we know who is participating. If you're new to this meeting, we do try to have some discussion on the items, and it's not just a presentation. So if you can, please call in or prepare to unmute yourself so you can discuss. If that's not an option for you, you can always enter into the chat to participate. So today we're going to talk about the racial inequity dashboard, as well as the transitional housing project performance reports. The racial inequity dashboard is so today we're going to be doing some planning around what should be included in this dashboard. It is meant to look at data in our COC and see if there's a difference in how clients are being served and their outcomes based on their race or ethnicity. So to start, I wanted to pose some questions to you all to think about. And then I have a bunch of examples of other data from other areas to show you, and then we'll get into some discussion. So as we're reviewing the examples, think about how you want to be able to access this data. What do you want to be able to do with this data? What level of data should we be looking at? And by that, I mean for the COC as a whole, or for your agency, or for specific projects within your agency. Should racial inequity be reviewed as part of your agency's performance? So when we do like performance measures and we do the NOFA ranking, should we be considering racial inequity? And what, if any, performance measures should we be looking at with the race and ethnicity lens? So we'll go into that a little bit more. Should racial inequity be reviewed for specific subpopulations? For example, household types, veterans, chronically homeless, youth, seniors. And how should race and ethnicity data be categorized? So this is more like the actual charts, which I'll show you in a minute as well. So just kind of consider those things as we go through. And so first, I wanted to show you some data from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, or NAEH. So they have a bunch of different examples of how they've looked at race and ethnicity across the country, as well as in COCs. So I want to share some of that with you. On the left here, you can see it is a comparison of the homeless population by race compared to the US population by race. And so ideally, if clients should be equally represented in the general population as well as the homeless population. But as you can see in this top bar chart, that isn't the case. So that's the kind of thing we would be looking at for our COC. So this is one way to look at the data. And you'll see here on the left, they are just looking at the race field. So if the client was Black, multiple races, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, Asian, or white. And then on the right side here, you can see that they have incorporated both race and ethnicity into one chart. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm asking about categorization. So in this chart, they have a bar for Hispanic clients. And then if the client is not Hispanic, they are categorized under the other races. So that was one of the questions I posed at the beginning. So think about that. Do you prefer this layout with Hispanic clients incorporated into one chart with race? Or do you prefer having like a race chart and then the same thing, but for ethnicity? So on the right here, you can see the number of people experiencing homelessness per 10,000 in the population. Oh, I got a raised hand.
Hi, it's Adriana from Wise Place.
Yes, hi.
Now, to make sure that I'm understanding the data correctly, on the left graphs that we were looking at, I see, it's categorized as race. Navy blue represents Black, purple represents 2 or more races, so on and so forth. So with the white population, is that the whole gray bar, or is there like a super tiny bar that we don't see after Asian? I'm just having a hard time like seeing what the white.
Oh yes, this whole gray bar is white.
Oh, okay, got it. Thank you.
So in the US population, this whole gray section is white, and in the homeless population, it's this. So white clients are less represented in the homeless population than the US population.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, so this bar on the right is showing the number of people experiencing homelessness per 10,000 people in the population. I kind of like this one because it's an easy way to compare clients of other races to white clients. So you can see like Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders are experiencing homelessness at a much higher rate, and so on and so forth. So the next 2 from NAEH, on the left, the method of comparing data is similar to the previous chart, where it's looking at the larger population compared to a specific population, but this is focusing on veteran clients. So the top chart is showing by race the distribution of homeless veterans. And then the bottom chart is looking at all veterans and by race. So African-American clients or African-American veterans are a larger proportion of the homeless veteran population than all veteran population. And on the bottom, they did the same thing with ethnicity. I got a comment. It may be good to align our racial categories to NAEH so we could easily compare our system to national data. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Allison. On the right side here, we are looking at racial disparities over time. So this is in the homeless population, the number of homeless clients by each race, and just year over year, those clients, and you can see the trends are pretty much staying the same. So that's another way we can look at this race data. NAEH also has a racial equity tool that we could consider for our own dashboard. So they are looking at who's experiencing homelessness by race, what projects the clients are getting into by race. So it's like clients in emergency shelter, clients in transitional housing, etc. And then they're looking at who is getting into permanent housing, so who's exiting to permanent housing, and then who is returning to homelessness after they've been housed. Next up, we have some data from Ohio. On the left side, this is similar to what we've seen. They're comparing the general population to the homeless population. But on the right, they are showing an over or under representation of clients, homeless clients by race, which is kind of interesting. So you can easily see Black and clients of multiple races are overrepresented in the homeless population, while Asian and white clients are underrepresented, and Native American and Latino are equally represented. Next, we have data from Texas, which is kind of different. So they are specifically looking at clients going through the coordinated entry system, and by race, looking at how long it's taking people to get to each point in the system. So they're looking at enrollment date to coordinated assessment date, and looking at days there. Then they're looking at assessment date to referral date, the days there, and then from referral to housing move-in. So that's another way that we can look at racial inequality. And then the last example I wanted to go over with you is looking at the performance measures that we have in our COC by race. So this is the clients exiting to permanent housing from rapid rehousing, emergency, or transitional housing projects, broken down by race. So you can see which clients in each racial population are exiting more frequently to permanent housing or less frequently. And if we do something like this, and keep in mind, we can do a lot of these different things if it's what the group is interested in, but if we do something like this, we can do it for different performance measures that we have. So I have those listed here just to remind everybody what type of measures we're currently looking at. We're looking at entries from homelessness, how long clients are in a project, how many days it's taking them to get placed in a permanent housing unit after entering the project, unit utilization, increased income, successful exits or permanent housing stabilization, returns to homelessness, referrals from CES, days between CES match and acceptance, referrals that are denied by housing providers, and successful coordinated entry referrals. So now we can talk about it, and I also have a little poll for everyone to do. So let me launch that. So please take a minute, answer the poll. The questions are: what level of data should the dashboard review? Should racial inequity be reviewed as part of the agency's performance? What, if any, performance measures should be reviewed by race or ethnicity? Should racial inequity be reviewed for specific subpopulations? How should race and ethnicity data be categorized? And which charts should we include in the racial inequity dashboard for Orange County? So go ahead and take a minute. Let me know if you want me to go back to any slides or if you have any comments or questions while you're doing the survey.
Erin, can you go back to the NAEH? Yeah, thank you. Just kind of all of them.
Sure. I see responses coming in, so thank you all. I'll give it a little more time for those that are finishing up. All right, 5 more seconds to hit that submit button. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. So thank you all for participating. I hope I'm sharing the results with you. So for the first question, what level of data should the dashboard review? Pretty much all 3 options were selected. No one said I don't have a use for the racial and equity dashboard, so that's great. Next question, we had a fairly close split between if racial inequity data should be reviewed as part of an agency's performance. Next, I'm looking at performance measures. Many of you said that we should be looking at all performance measures by race. For the subpopulations questions, most of you said yes, we want to look at all subpopulations. For how data should be categorized, most of you said it should be combined into one chart. But there was a few of you that did want it separate. And then lastly, which charts did you like was also a fairly even split. The most popular was the comparison of homeless data to the OC population, as well as the Orange County performance data. So does anybody want to dive into that a little bit? Do you want to explain your answers a little bit or talk about some of these visuals that we have?
I actually kind of liked the Ohio one. Not that it didn't say similar information as some of the others, but it made it like stood out a lot more, I guess. The over under representation.
This one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the disparities. I really liked that one because I don't think a lot of people really understand what they're looking at when they see things like, you know, a chart shows like, you know, white people take up X amount of the population, but are only X amount, or like the other way around, like Black people take over or are only like, you know, a small portion of the, you know, population. However, there's like a huge amount of that small sliver, like that, you know, of those that are homeless. So I think showing this like 31% or whatever is like, versus like the white people here. I think that's really, really telling. So I don't know. I just think this is pretty, it's a very compelling, I guess. Or it's in your face. It shows you, you know. But yeah. But otherwise, I just voted for all the pretty much all of the other ones that were like against national data, and also including Latino, Latina in the with the races, just because I know a lot of Latinos don't necessarily consider themselves white. So I think that's really important to include as a race.
Okay.
Can you go a couple of slides down where a little bit more.
Do you remember what it was?
Oh, the opposite direction. Yeah, it's where you were posing a couple of questions about should we be measuring the following by race, but it's like closer to the end of the slides. If you can go the opposite direction. I'm trying to see the questions. Doing a terrible job describing it. There, that's the one. Go back.
Okay.
The other one.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So what I was going to say about this slide was the point that stands out to me the most from this slide is, I guess the two that stand out to me are referrals from CES and successful CES referrals, because I think that data will be I'm probably jumping to a huge conclusion here, but I think it would probably be very representative to the rest of the information. So those 2 points really are the ones that stand out to me if we include race as like how many white people, how many Hispanic people, how many Asian American, Asian Black people are referrals from CES, because then that tells us who's accessing CES and what are the better ways or initiatives that we could take to maybe reach out to populations that we're not reaching, because we know Orange County is diverse. So if we're not reaching a certain population, we need to know about it.
Okay.
I also selected, we should be considering some of these performance measures. I think they are really useful for just gauging how our programs are serving folks, but also gauging outcomes specifically. I'm thinking days to permanent housing placement is probably a good one, as well as probably referrals from CES and referrals denied by housing provider and successful CES referrals, and of course successful exits to permanent housing. Those are all very important to monitor any agencies or any programs performance. There are some things, however, that might be the biases of outside institutions that might affect our data and might affect who even gets access to programs. For instance, we know that there are a lot of shelters that get referrals from police departments, and we all know what the reputation of police departments has been lately as it relates to racial equity. I'm not sure there are a lot of us who'd be comfortable having those biases potentially affect program participation metrics.
In terms of how you're rated?
Correct.
Okay. And you said exits, days to PH placement, the CES referrals. Was there another one?
Exits, days to permanent housing placement, CES referrals. No, that was pretty much it.
Okay.
To piggyback off of what you just shared, that was one of the things that kind of came to mind on days to permanent housing and the biases that our teams are trying to overcome with landlords. That's a bit out of our control, and some families are more successful at a faster pace than others, and the landlords are screening for things, for example, income, prior evictions, and a lot of that we see a disproportionate representation of people of color. So I think it's important to know the information and look at the information. I think it'll help the way we navigate our programs and communicate with the community. It's just hard to tell what, in terms of an agency performance measure, what are you trying to say in terms of, if an agency isn't as successful with a certain population, what does that mean exactly? Is it that agencies work that they're contributing? Is it a community kind of contribute, that it contributed to that, a combination? I guess I'm just kind of figuring out what will we get out of that?
Yeah, I agree. And even when I was looking at some of the data, I was like, this could be interpreted in so many ways. One of the things that I was looking at just separately was entries from homelessness by race. And I think white clients were entering from homeless situations less than other races. And I was like, so does that mean that some projects are more lenient with white clients or more willing to help them? Or it could mean anything really, like, so yeah, that's a good point also.
Yeah, I would add, I think we shouldn't shy away from looking at individual projects and what their demographic data could tell us in terms of some of those inadvertent biases or barriers to entry by certain races. I think that's important. I think what gets us into a slippery slope is then when we start to use that information to maybe rank a project or to compare it against others, or in that sort of vein of performance management. I think that's really a scary route to go to because of what Rosa said about just the community at large really impacting some of those outcomes. I also think too, when you start to add those as a performance metric for programs, there can be unintended consequences of that, right? Like where people want their ranking to go up, so they, really target a group and not another group. And we can see, I've seen that happen in other sectors where if you're incentivizing things in the wrong way, it can really have some of those unintended consequences. So I would just really say at this juncture in our evaluation that we really stray away from that and just use it as education tools so we can improve our system.
I agree.
I just want to share that I also agree with what Allison and the others have shared previous to this. I think that it is good to look at, I personally think all of these performance measures on the slide are informative and useful. And I think that it would be educational to view them through the lens of racial equity for these different projects. I think there are a lot of challenges that come up when we then talk about, actually judging the performance based on these, because of all of the other outside influences that may impact these performance measures as well. I think if it was something that was completely in the control of a project or a provider, such as the number of case management hours, as an example, I think that would be something that is more informative and more indicative of that project's performance in terms of race. But I think that just like Rosalinda had mentioned, the landlords and overcoming that, or even looking at income and wage disparities and things of that nature. I think that it's just really difficult to judge a homeless service provider's performance when these things are not necessarily in their control, or not the biases that they themselves hold, which deliver these impacts.
Okay, thank you, Catherine.
I wanted to add one other thing, pulling from my experience when I used to work with families. At the time when we were working with families, and I'm sure it's still this way, we were really focusing on service planning areas. And so making sure that families were being connected to their specific service planning area. So we wanted to make sure that somebody in San Juan wasn't going all the way to Santa Ana to get services, for example. So just putting into perspective that if a person or an agency is being measured based on their location and who has access to that location, that seems a little unfair. So it's just another perspective to add to that too.
Okay.
I do want to add to that. In terms of CES, there is no SPA consideration in terms of referrals to housing opportunities unless the CES policies and procedures specifically outline that. So if we're looking at this in terms of housing providers, there wouldn't be necessarily that same SPA consideration unless it's beneficial to the household, which I'm sure occurs on both sides. But just want to add that in there. I think, Adriana, you did make a really good point in terms of certain providers being located in certain areas that may have different demographics than the average in Orange County, but wanted to add in that clarification as well.
Yeah, I just don't want like one organization or the other being, if we're just measuring not CES, but like an organization's performance. Does that make sense? It wasn't so much about CES as it was about.
Yeah, no, totally understand where you're coming from. I just, in case those who aren't familiar with CES, I wanted to add in that context.
other comments or questions about any of the data we've looked at or any of these questions that we've been considering?
I also just want to second Cassie's point about including Hispanic Latino as a race for the same reason that Cassie mentioned, which was that a lot of times clients who are Hispanic or Latino wouldn't identify with any of the race options that are available to them.
Okay.
Just to second that or third that, Ralph, and for clients who do identify clearly as Hispanic or Latino, but don't feel that the racial categories fit them well. So I agree with that sentiment as well.
Okay, and so going back to the level of data, I mentioned that it's pretty evenly distributed across the different options. So is it accurate to say that everyone wants to be able to pull their own racial inequity dashboards for their agencies and projects, as well as seeing like a COC level dashboard? Rosalinda says, yeah. Sarah does too.
I think for this being, a new lens that we use to view our data, if we start a little bit broader and work our way towards some more of the detail like COC data versus project type data, then agency level data. I mean, I feel like we're going to have to work our way towards understanding what we're looking at, how it's pulled, and then having the opportunity to kind of look at the overall number and then see how your specific agency is faring against the overall number and give you ways to kind of strategize would be helpful.
Okay. Any other general thoughts or any other comments on the samples that I shared? Any questions on those? All right, I'm not seeing anything else coming in, so we are going to take your feedback and start working on this. It will probably end up being agency dashboards that are available in Looker for you to pull, as well as a separate COC dashboard that will likely be published like on a quarterly basis or something like that. So we will start working on both of these and incorporating your feedback to the best of our ability. We may have something to share on this next data meeting. We probably will have this group review the draft before we go and publish anything. The COC dashboard will probably also need to be approved by the COC board. So we plan to bring both of those back to this group in the future. Any final thoughts before we move on to the transitional housing project performance? All right. So thank you all for your participation. That's very helpful for us as we move forward on this. So now we're going to transition over to the latest transitional housing project performance report. This report was pulled from April 2021 through March 2022. And if your agency is COC funded for transitional housing, this will be included in the NOFO ranking. That should only be one project. So everyone else, this is just for your reference and to help you with your own planning internally. So as usual, we have a project scores report. This lists all transitional housing projects that were included on the report and their performance for each measure. And then we also have the goals and outcomes report. So first you can see clients entering from homeless situations has gone down a bit over time to 73%. This is likely because transitional housing projects are not receiving HUD funding or ESG funding, and therefore have looser requirements on who they allow into their projects. So that's likely the reason for that decrease. In terms of length of stay, this is looking at how long clients are staying in transitional housing projects. This has increased over the past couple of years, and this is similar to what we've seen for emergency shelter projects, and is likely related to COVID and projects keeping clients longer than they have in the past, just to ensure they're not returning to homelessness or an unsafe situation because of COVID. Goal 5, unit utilization has been going down, and part of that I think is due to COVID. But I also wanted to take a pause and talk with the group and see if any of you have any comments or feedback on why it's been decreasing so drastically. On goal 5, when we go down a little bit farther, most of the decrease is households without children. The utilization for that household type is a lot lower. So I was wondering if anybody had any comments on that before we move forward.
This is kind of in the realm of conjecture, half educated guess, but we've been seeing a lot of projects for which we've gotten funding, for instance, rapid rehousing, that sort of thing, where we have the program and the funding ready to go, but the potential matches for clients just really isn't there. And there's low demand for projects like rapid rehousing relative to EHV programs right now. So that's where I would just guess there's been a lot of funding for programs, but the suitable matches just aren't there at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments on that? All right, goals 6 and 7 are looking at increased income. So goal 6 is looking at those that exited and whether they increased income, and 7 is looking at, goal 6 is looking at those that stayed in the project at the end of the reporting period and increased their income. Goal 7 is looking at those that exited with increased income. We've been consistently meeting these measures for the past couple of years, which is great. Last time we did transitional housing, we did talk about increasing these thresholds, but didn't do it. But wanted to revisit with the group if we should increase the thresholds for goal 6 and 7 a little bit. For goal 6, maybe we go up to 15%, and goal 7 to maybe 40%. But willing to hear feedback from the group. Does anyone hate the idea? So, all right. If I don't hear anything otherwise, then we can increase the thresholds for both. So 15% goal 6, 40% goal 7.
You mentioned that we spoke about it last time and then we didn't go through with it. Was there a reason why we didn't?
So last time the group was concerned about the pandemic and if that would impact the ability to meet these measures, but it doesn't appear that that's really been the case since the January 2020 report was just before the pandemic, and then all the rest of these were during the pandemic. But that was the reason.
I do want to point out that although we've met thresholds, I see a slight decline throughout the pandemic. So I just don't know what long-term effects that could have in the coming years. It's the only thing I want to point out.
Okay. Anyone else? So yes, there is a little bit of decline. However, the threshold, even with the increased thresholds, we would still be meeting all of these. So I think I'm still okay with it, and I'm not hearing anything from anybody else. So, and we haven't increased the thresholds for transitional housing in a long time, maybe even not since we've started doing this. So I think that we should try and move forward with it.
Can you repeat the proposed thresholds again?
For goal 6, 15%. So going up 3%, goal 7, 40%. All right, I got a thumbs up. All right, I'm going to keep moving. Goal 8 is looking at the percentage of clients that are exiting to permanent housing situations from transitional housing. This has gone down a little bit with the pandemic. This is another one of the measures where I think we're seeing that data more, or changes in the data more. So that one, we will keep the threshold that we have. Goal 10 is looking at clients to exit to permanent housing situations and later return to the homeless system. We've been fairly consistent over the past couple of years. So we will keep that threshold as is also. So kind of going into the specifics a little bit for each measure. For goal 1, you can see that households with children are entering from homeless situations more frequently than clients in households without children. For clients that are not entering from homeless situations, most are coming from family or friends or institutional settings. And again, this is likely due to a little more leniency in the funding that these projects are receiving to take clients that are not from HUD homeless situations. For goal 2, length of stay, clients in households with children are staying in the project longer than clients in households without children. And in our little bar chart here, we have the number of enrollments that are meeting the threshold, the 473. So that's 57% of all of the transitional housing enrollments are meeting the threshold. And then it's pretty much an even split between those that are taking 6 months to a year or more than a year. Unit utilization. So this is going back to what I mentioned before about the unit utilization being on the decline. Households without children utilization is very low compared to households with children, which is about normal. I was also wondering if, I think it depends on the transitional housing project and how it's set up. Households with children, usually they have their own units. And so that wouldn't be impacted as much by COVID because a family would be staying together either way. But households without children, if they are placing multiple clients in like the same room or unit, that may make some clients uncomfortable with COVID. So that could also be why that decrease is happening. Goal 6 is looking at clients that increase their income while enrolled in the project. You can see the number of clients included in this measure is pretty low, which is standard because the client has to be enrolled for at least a year in order to be included in this measure. The good news is that 85% of all clients either maintained or increased their income, which is great. Only 15% had a decrease. And goal 7 is looking at clients that exited with increased income. And the number of clients included is obviously higher. Households with children are reporting increases in income more than households without children. And almost 75% of the clients included in the measure either had an increase or they maintained their income, which is good. Has anyone experienced this with the households with children versus households without children, and why households with children are exiting with increases in income where households with children are not? Anyone have thoughts on that? I was kind of wondering if households without children might be exiting on more frequently without maybe checking in with the staff before they leave, whereas households with children are maybe more communicative about when they're leaving, which could impact it. But I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that. All right, I'm not seeing anything coming in, so I'm gonna keep going.
Erin,
Okay.
really quickly, one thing just popped into my mind, and I don't know if this would be a factor in this, but I know that families were receiving like those, like I forgot what they're called, but they were like the payments, the monthly payments every month during the pandemic. I don't know if that would have been included at like the exit screen as like an additional income source. That's like one thing that came to mind, but I'm sorry, I don't remember what it is called. And there, if anyone else knows, please drop it in the chat, but they were like monthly child payments that families would get every month.
Stimulus payments.
Yes, thank you, Cassie. So I don't know if those were included as an increase in income. Yeah, and then John Paul dropped in the chat the income tax credit.
Okay, yeah, that's that could have been included. If it was ongoing, then I would think it probably was included. But if it was like the one-time stimulus that a lot of people got, that probably wouldn't have been included, or probably shouldn't have been at least. But if it was ongoing, it probably was. That's a good point. Yeah, if Catherine said that they were ongoing for a period, so yeah, that could be reason why that difference is occurring. Goal 8 is looking at clients that exited to permanent housing situations. So we again have a big gap between households with children and households without children. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that as well. If that income tax credit could also be impacting those exits. For those that are not exiting to permanent housing, they're in most cases either going to a homeless situation or that data was not collected. And then clients are also exiting to temporary situations, and a couple are exiting to institutional settings. And our last measure is goal 10. This is looking at clients that exit to permanent housing and later return to homelessness. The percentages are fairly consistent across all of the population types. When the clients are returning to the homeless system, they are returning to rapid rehousing most frequently, followed by street outreach and emergency shelter. The rapid rehousing one, it could be an error in data entry. I know some clients are going from like transitional to rapid rehousing projects. If the transition occurred within 14 days, then that would not be considered a return to homelessness. It would be considered flow through the system. But if there was more than 14 days between the client's transitional housing exit and the rapid rehousing enrollment, it would be considered a return to homelessness. So if that's happening with any of your clients, I would just suggest reviewing the entry and exit dates from your transitional housing project, as well as that entry into the rapid rehousing, and make sure those dates are all correct so that you're not counted as a return if it was just a transition. And our last bar chart is looking at when clients return to the homeless system after exiting. So most are coming back to the homeless system within 6 months. And then the next largest category is 6 months to 1 year. Most clients are not coming back to the system after they've been exited for a year. All right, that's all I have on the transitional housing reports. So as a reminder, for those that are participating in the COC NOFO, we talked about permanent supportive housing projects in April. We talked about rapid rehousing in May, and we talked about transitional housing this time. The COC ad hoc will be looking at all of the measures that we have for these project types, and we'll be determining which ones they want to include in the NOFO ranking. But the data from these last 3 reports are what will be used. So I would recommend reviewing these reports that were published and make sure that you understand your performance and that your performance is accurate. If there's data entry issues with your data, that we will not be fixing those on these reports since the agencies were given time to fix those. But if you think that we've calculated something incorrectly, we will go back and fix that or confirm with you that it was calculated correctly. So we recommend you doing that. I got a question. Do you know when the NOFO will drop? We expect sometime in early summer, because HUD has been kind of releasing the first couple items in the NOFO process. So it'll probably be pretty soon. Any other comments or questions on the transitional housing project performance reports before we wrap up? or any questions about the racial inequity dashboard? All right, the next meeting is scheduled for July 14th. And as usual, we will be sending out the meeting minutes from this meeting as well as a recording in the slides. Like I mentioned before, we're going to bring the racial inequity dashboard back to this group and then within the next couple months. So we look forward to your continued participation. And if you haven't already, enter your agency name into the chat box. I will stay on for a couple minutes to see if anyone has any last comments or questions. And otherwise, have a great day, everyone. All right, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm gonna close the meeting. Thanks, everybody. Oh, got a question. Yes, I can do that, Carol. Thanks. Bye, everybody. Have a good day.